To pray for our leader, Advocate Chamisa. Yes, Father, we just pray for that coverage, Holy Spirit coverage, and every leadership, we bring it in your hands. Yes, Father, in the mighty name of Jesus, I thank you for the day. Let glory and honor be unto you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Reverend. Sorry, while we're still on our feet, we're going to sing the national anthem of Zimbabwe. If the media team can just assist us with an electronic version, if we could all stand for the national anthem, and then we'll get into the business of the day. If we could all take our seats. There's certain people that I couldn't hear singing. I won't point to anyone. Members of the National Standing Committee, National Executive Members, Members of Parliament, Councillors of the City of Harare, Provincial Executive Members, District Executive Officers, Ward Chairpersons, Provincial Chairpersons, members of the Diplomatic Corps. We'd like to welcome everybody to the Movement for Democratic Change's roadmap to economic recovery, legitimacy, openness, and democracy, the launch of Reload, which is the party's policy document. How many people are excited about that? How many people know that the MDC is a government in waiting? How many of you are ready to govern?
Yes.
How many of you are ready to understand what the policy direction of the party is?
Yes.
So with all of that in mind, we're going to talk today. I think Zimbabwe is at a crossroads. We all agree that mediocrity has been our name. We struggle for electricity, we're struggling for water, we're struggling for the most basic things, and we cannot continue like that. And it's constantly said by the party's leadership that we are a party of excellence. So not only are we going to exercise our constitutional rights in holding the government to account, but we are in the business as well of alternative policy formulation. So that is what the business of today is. Now, before we go into the meat and substance of what the program has to offer today, we'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge two of our cadres who have been, we say, wrongfully arrested and are about to be the subject of a malicious prosecution, Job Sikala and Gift Siziba. Some party members have gone ahead and are standing with them in solidarity, but we just want to keep them in mind. And if anything, what's going on with them reminds us why the fight for democracy and freedom is so important. Why it's so important that we do have a party that's a strong opposition, that does stand for constitutionalism, that does stand for free speech and free expression, that does acknowledge and take advantage of its right under Section 67 to challenge the government, to hold it to account, and to ensure that Zimbabwe does get what it deserves in terms of freedom, in terms of fairness, and in terms of opportunity. So without further ado, without further ado, there are people who've been in the struggle for democracy a whole lot longer than some of us, people who are aging in the struggle. Brian Kagoro is definitely one of the voices of principle we've had over the years, the decades, should I say. While I was still in high school, Brian was in the forefront of chasing constitutionalism and the hope and aspiration of a better Zimbabwe. So I'm going to ask Brian Kagoro for the next 20 minutes to talk to us about the nature of the Zimbabwean crisis. And this is important because our policy document is going to speak to or answer and provide solutions to what that crisis is. So it's important for us to have some clear definition of that. So Brian, or everyone, join me in a wild round of applause for Brian Kagoro as he comes up. Maybe before he does so.
Yeah. He's not here, is he?
He's here because of the unstabilizing the combat with the CIC coming.
Yes, he's coming. He's late.
Is he coming?
Mm-hmm. This whispering thing, guys. Party of excellence.
All right. So, slight change of program. I've been advised that the president is on his way. So while we wait for him, we're just going to take a brief musical interlude. And as soon as he arrives, we're going to get into Brian Kagoro's presentation. So please bear with us. He's on his way. And if the media team may just assist us with a brief musical interlude, and then we'll get into the business of today. Thank you.
I'm accommodated. So, we are now waiting for President Nelson Chamisa to arrive. Party of excellence.
Yeah, no.
We're waiting for the president to arrive, guys. He's not here yet, but when he arrives, then they'll start the program. I don't know. Do you want me to keep streaming or do you want me to start when he comes?
Just keep streaming.
Also, that we know that the president is late.
Keep streaming, man. Keep streaming.
You guys might be online for a while.
All right, comrades. So, the first thing you must fix in your reloaded is your timekeeping.
There's no way the event should start when the president is not here. This blackness, that's not allowed.
This blackness?
We need to fight our blackness.
I
got timekeeping. We're going to see how long we have to wait. I hope he's really close by. Or maybe he had to appear in court. That might be another thing. No, he has to appear in court. Hi, Tawanda.
I'm the only one without bread, yeah.
Yeah, because he's not serious about being a party member. I'm joking, I'm not yet a party member.
We should be running our business. We should be, yeah.
Actually, speaking of running businesses, I have to attend to something, so yeah.
All right, my comrades. Kuda, don't you was talking? I saw him. Take out the gum. How is everybody doing? Yeah, I'm wasting data. I thought that the proceedings were starting, but Razonzi, President Awasatrawuya, Saka protocols must be observed. Tamirira. I got Morisa sister moment. Lachera. Magasimbe. Morisa is Tata Tanga was stream, Manje, Hans President Awasatrawuya. Tomo Mira.
kuenda kuenvironment sport saka dzimwenyaya dzavanofana kutanga vatarisa vasati vauya pamwe chete pati mire program dzimire tichaloncha reload so chifamba negwara remusangano otambo madzai maera our sister is MC. This is how we welcome to MDC. We are a big family.
A big family.
I'm happy to see no my here. See Fatsu and also we're just going to anticipate to come.
Love to see you, my sister. Good to see you. Good to see you, baby. Cheers. Okay. Let me walk around. Where are my comrades? Okay, so we're looking for when the president walks in, but he's not yet walking in. So Carl, the document is coming out today. I think Maureen is reading it here somewhere.
No, actually,
This is not
what I'm reading is what is equity. This is an economic policy statement by the government. I'm interested in the date. It's February 1981. Which
Jesus!
means February 1981.
They've done nothing. Update their policy document. Despite the internet and despite the new ways of thinking and cryptocurrency. So, we're waiting for the president to arrive. That should be interesting. Let me go for a walk. I'm waiting to talk to the SG. He's on the phone, and then I'll let you guys know when the president is arriving. So we are, it looks like the SG is moving. So let me walk and try and talk to the SG. The SG is Mr. Charlton Wende, one of my favorite politicians. I believe the president is here now. Okay. Honorable TB is here holding the reloaded document. Honorable TB, how are you, sir? Welcome to your launch. How are you? So the Vice President is now here. Let me greet the SG here. SG, Mr. Charlton Wende, Mofi Mkono. He is the guy who organizes the party. Waiting for the president to arrive. Alright, if anyone on Send It 2 can send me some airtime, I'll keep streaming. I'll stream as long as I can on my current bundle. If you can send it as a bundle, it'll be great.
How are you doing? Zay. Bro.
Okay, that's the president's motorcade, I think, and we're waiting for the president to come out. Welcome, Mr. President. How are you, sir? Mr. President Nelson Chamisa is now here.
Right, we'd like to obviously acknowledge the arrival of our President, Advocate Nelson Chamisa, our Vice President, Honorable Tendai Biti, our Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, members of the Standing Committee who are here. Without further ado, I'm going to call upon Brian Kagoro to come and talk to us about the state of the nation currently and a summary of the national crisis which our reload policy aims to address. Let's give Brian a round of applause. Brian, I'm giving you 20 minutes, please.
I'm sorry. Mtungamiri MDC Ulpano, President Nelson Chamisa, the Presidium, and SG, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the press, comrades from civil society, ladies and gentlemen. I had been given a lot more time, but when you deal with an advocate, you have to be careful. I wanted to start off by suggesting to you something that many people don't look at anymore, which is the fact that the national crisis we're describing is not just a crisis of legitimacy, it's not just a crisis of governance, it's not just a crisis of perception, but it's a crisis of two things. Allow me to take off my hat. It's a crisis, number one. It's a crisis of imagination. The reason why it is a crisis of imagination is because we have run this country on the basis of memory for a long time and not had an opportunity to think about what it will take to move forward. When I was told yesterday that I would have to be a replacement of an eminent professor, I quickly looked for this policy document. It is called Great Growth with Equity, an Economic Policy Statement, February 1981. And the document says that it seeks to do the following, or it diagnosed the problem as the following: to undertake a vigorous program for development of the country and to pursue and implement policies based on socialist, egalitarian, and democratic principles in condition of rapid economic growth, full employment, price stability, dynamic efficiency in resource allocation. And then it looks at the history of economic exploitation, the grossly uneven structural and productive development of the rural and urban economy. And it looks at various other things. But the document set as its objectives to establish a society founded on democratic and egalitarian principles, which are inherent in policies and measures, to achieve a sustained high rate of economic growth and speedy development in order to raise incomes and standards of living, to develop and restructure the economy in ways which promote rural development and desired changes in the patterns of consumption, technology, exports, and in ways consistent with the most desirable use and conservation of natural resources and the environment, and to end imperialist exploitation and achieve greater and more equitable degree of ownership of natural resources, including land, promote participation in and ownership of a significant portion of the economy by nationals and the state, create and maintain high levels of employment for Zimbabweans in all sectors and at all levels of skill and responsibility, and redress the historical racial imbalance in skilled employment. I could go on. Does this look like we have not progressed from this very day in 1981? To a large extent, it may be. There was a tension in that first economic blueprint, and that tension was twofold, and that tension faces Zimbabwe today. It was a tension between continuity and change. The continuity of capitalist growth versus the aspirations for what was then deemed socialist equity. The question was whether to level up and approximate white lifestyles, which at the time, per capita income, at one time, they were only matched by Hollywood celebrities. That means people who lived in White Rhodesians had a very high standard of living. So we chose to level up. When we leveled up, that meant that we deracialized. In deracializing, people went into white schools, people went into white suburbs and white residences. When we did this, we didn't address four things that remain a haunting factor in our development. Rural micro-enterprise development remained unaddressed. We did not in any significant and meaningful way address the labor question, the factory question. We did not in any way address the technology question. So we mass produced very intelligent people who spoke good English, but we did not enter the race technologically where we would make our personnel not only globally competitive in terms of literacy, but locally productive. But the luxury of 1981, which we don't currently have, is that there was ZimCode, which was a pledge made in March for $800 million. And part of that money was given to the private sector, and the private sector at the time was starved of forex, almost similar to now. And some of it was spent on infrastructure rehabilitation and some of it in building new infrastructure. Hence, in the first 10 years, you see a number of high schools, you see a number of clinics and facilities that were built. Why am I looking at this historical period? It was a period characterized by social mobility. So you could literally gauge the plight and condition of workers in 1978 and the minimal progress made in the first 10 years. But Bernard Chidzero, Herbert Murerwa, Simba Makoni, Chinamasa, Tendai Biti, and every Minister of Finance since then has always had in the budget statement a statement to the effect that we are living way beyond our means. And it is important to look at when the workers in this country started realizing that the consumption happening amongst bureaucrats in the state had nothing to do with benefit to the common man. The labor strikes from 1988, when Chandrai was charged with treason for supporting workers, students who were condemning corruption. 1991, 1992, up to 1996, when workers were protesting against ESSA, the Economic Structural Adjustment Program. It is a program that was designed to bring reform, to try and ensure that we live within our means, but a program that manufactured a structural crisis in the economy. We were still struggling with deracialization and transition from a minority-owned economy. Now we had entered into an economy which was hostile to blacks, but hostile to black workers and peasants, hostile to black graduates in particular. At the University of Zimbabwe, students started protesting against the policies that had been adopted in 1990-91. And you are familiar with how those protests and those movements of workers and students led to the foundation of this party. And this foundation of this party was in the context where in 1997 we had gone into an expensive war in the Congo. We now learned from UN reports that that war produced mega millionaires from people who, although the country was paying $2 million a day, they were looting perhaps the equivalent and lining their pockets. In that same context, we soon thereafter entered into a fast-track land reform program. Now, land reform was very necessary and remains necessary. But what happened with the fast-track land reform program is that it is black workers. Gapuz tells us that there were more than 500,000 workers on the farms, and of the 500,000 workers, over 85% were displaced. They were rendered destitute. That question has not been addressed by any government since then. The rendering destitute of workers, which means a dimension of the crisis of an economy which had been designed to serve a minority white, which was now still serving a minority, this time of a mixed race nature, had become not only non-beneficial to the majority, but the economy had become hostile to the poor, and the poor had no one else but themselves to defend their right to live, their right to life, and their right to livelihood. Yet there was fast-track land reform in which very few poor people benefited. Yes, a lot of people who are not rich benefited, and some members within the opposition and civil society benefited. Afterwards, we entered into an indigenization program. The indigenization program continued to benefit an elite, continued to talk of an economics of growth without equity, growth without inclusion, growth without improving the plight of workers and the plight of the unemployed. A lot shall be said about the coup, and I will speak about the militarization of the state. So what is the national crisis? Because depending on which newspaper you are reading and which intellectual you are talking to, depending on whether you choose to stylize and characterize people as stooges of imperialism or stipendiaries of a militarized junta, whichever narrative you want, there is one thing we agreed on, that when the lights go off in ZESA, it does not matter which political party card you carry, we are all in darkness. And when money is stolen from the public purse, it doesn't matter which card you carry of a political party. When you go to a hospital, you will not find medication. You'll be forced to pay for basic services. Yet the elite can take from your taxes and go and get treatment in India and South Africa, and even go in expensive jets. And this creates the impression to the ordinary person that the fight for power is a fight for survival. And therefore people no longer see the contest of democracy as one about running the state
and making sure that it distributes benefits, income, and outputs of development to everyone. But the state is now seen not only as a site of accumulation, but as a site of survival for a clique. We're not here to talk about economic policies simply to redress the ethical dimensions of excessive consumption. The nature of the crisis, my friends, is one where the economic environment is uncertain and not long-term based, and it is unsustainable. And ourselves are run by a state which is weak and not developmental in orientation. Our communities are fragmented. Now, instead of talking about the common Zimbabwean identity, every single group is splintering into another small group. Now, there's nothing wrong with your ethnic background, but when ethnicity becomes the sole premise in the midst of such a Herculean task of reconstructing the nation, reconstructing the state, and ensuring that we catch up with the 50 years we have lost in development, it seems to me unfortunate that we localize both perception and localize the problem and localize and turn each other into the sole problem. It does not matter who runs the state if the structure of the economy is not geared to ensure that workers are primary, the unemployed are primary, that women are primary. We will have an economy registering 7% growth and a poverty registering 45% death. So I want to suggest to you that the crisis we face is that not only is our economy in a country that is rich in natural resources, donor dependent and aid dependent. What is clear to us is that the nature of the crisis is because of poor imagination. We now auction our natural resources for a song. We sell off critical national assets under the guise of investment. We do not have any particularly meaningful engagement process with the diaspora. When we talk about the diaspora, we talk about a meeting in one or other location where we make grand processes. Even the policy on diaspora engagement and the vehicle for engaging the diaspora remains incomplete. And yet we know that in terms of capital base, that diaspora could easily give us close to $900 million. That would be critical for a portion of our recovery. But why don't the diaspora or diasporans give money to their country? Is it because they are unpatriotic, that they are so comfortable in the hamburger eating in the centers where they have gone either as economic exiles or exiled? No, it is because they have no trust in the system of government. They have no trust in those who are running the state. They have no trust in the predatory elite. And therefore, there is a crisis of ethics and a crisis of governance in our country. Our society is deeply unequal. And part of the inequality in our society is a crisis not only of governance, but of power. How power is transacted in the private space, how power is dealt with in the public space, how power is dealt with in the economy. But that crisis of power is linked to how we have conflated the party, ZANU-PF, the state of Zimbabwe, the military, the economy, such that when we're talking about the economy, there is no policy being made that is not linked to interests of a particular elite in the state. Until we can decouple the embeddedness of the elite, whether that elite is MDC, ZANU-PF, or civil society, from the economy, and move again towards egalitarian objectives, we are tinkering on the edges. It's a beauty contest of bullfrogs. Ladies and gentlemen, we are faced with a crisis. We have a weak and dysfunctional state. When we started politicizing the public service, in essence, we created the very power station for corruption in our nation. The idea that the civil service, the public service, which is meant to be a professional administration, is manned by persons who are party apparatchiks, essentially means that they make their decisions based on body language of the political elite, not on merit, not on the substantive requirements of decision making. Until we depoliticize the public service and public administration, it is difficult to professionalize it. It is difficult to deal with the ethical questions, and it is difficult to deal with the competency questions, because there are certain people you can't fire, because firing them, if they are senior in the party, means you are causing factionalism and rumptions in the party, whatever that party is. But we are not spared ourselves as those who have fought for democracy. I come here with a heavy heart, and I know that this leadership is committed to addressing it. It is unacceptable that fighting for years, and for my brother Morgan Trainwright dying, still fighting, for Chiminya and others dying at the hands of a brutal regime, we should have our comrades get into local councils and loot and become land barons. No, no, no. We cannot have it. Friends, we ourselves have become very intolerant. We've become intolerant of people who hold different views, intolerant of people who criticize us. So when we say Chamisa, there will be neromania or nerophobia. When we say somebody else, there can never be an objective analysis of the leadership imperative of the moment. As Zimbabweans, we have become accomplices in our own destruction until we say that this is the requirement of all leadership, whatever its pedigree, that leadership that does not align with those values. And if you are in this party, it is social democratic values. And if those social democratic values are not in any policy, it cannot be your policy. If social democratic behaviors are not in any leadership, it cannot be your leadership. Otherwise, the space will be captured by boys and girls with money. So I want to then say to us, the first challenge we face is that we must safeguard the ability to create a productive economy. In creating a productive economy, we need both distributive and redistributive policies. We need to deal with systems of taxation that take care of the following. There are women who are sitting in this room who have, without being paid anything by the state, played the role of caregiver to persons living with HIV and AIDS, to orphans in community. And that money that was meant for social protection for orphans, it's getting into the pockets of bureaucrats buying expensive cars, and they claim they are buying fuel which never arrives. Amen. Our economy must be a solidarity economy. It must be a care economy. It must be an economy with a human face. Otherwise, growth figures without any human element to it essentially mean the following. We are attractive to foreign investors, and we are not meaningful and beneficial to our own citizens. So, I am looking for a day when this space, which is not ruling party or which is government in waiting or next government, begins to talk about what does indigenization of the economy from a social democratic perspective mean? Because the economy cannot be owned by foreigners. We may be, as a generation, comfortable with it, but we will have our own malemas and a generation of young people who begin to say, yes, we hold a green passport and we are citizens, but when it comes to the economy, we are outsiders. Trima Roja, we are outsiders. There must be some form of nationalism that informs our Pan-Africanism. And that nationalism says, we welcome investment, but that investment must not produce out of our workers, produce out of our communities, paupers and spoiled and damaged environments and polluted air and polluted water. But it must produce amongst our people the capacity to reproduce life, the capacity to reproduce prosperity. We have an education. We want to apply it. The governance context has not allowed us to. And what we want is the opportunity. We don't want freebies. We are not beggars. And that is an important starting point for a social democratic party. We are creating an economy in which everyone can participate and a politics in which everyone can participate. I want to suggest that the crisis of militarization must be seen together with the current crisis of militarism. Why is that important? Militarization is soldiers embedded in public administration, soldiers in the economy, soldiers even soldiers everywhere. as Peter Tosh would have said, Babylon man everywhere. Right? It is important for us to say that the military must be appreciated as a critical component of any democratic society when it comes to defending the interests of Zimbabwe. But the military must not be over-essentialized as the sole arm for doing economics, for doing politics. Because at some stage, society will get militarized. Because people will begin to believe, erroneously, that without resorting to violence or to militarism, you are unable to negotiate space and place in the economy and society. So let me prepare to land. The problem of Rhodesia, Mr. President, was twofold. In fact, three. It was the refusal of white settlers to accept universal adult suffrage. It was racial segregation of society. And the structural economic challenges characterized by enclavity within, let's say, natural resource extraction. The militarization of natural resource extraction and its confinement to a minority. The problem of Zimbabwe is akin to the problem of Rhodesia. We have deracialized, but it is the refusal of a black militarized minority to accept universal adult suffrage and segregation of society on the basis of ethnicity, on the basis of political affiliation. It is a structural economic challenge, and I dare say it is not true that each time there's a Zimbabwean problem we say IMF. IMF used to be Mugabe's fault, now it's Mnangagwa's fault. I don't know what it will be when it's Chamisa, right? The problems of our economy I've sought to demonstrate are linked to our vision of the economic development pathway. I've also sought to demonstrate that they are structural and historical in nature. And I've sought to demonstrate that our poor governance, our exclusive governance, our conflation of the military or securocracy, the economy and the state has essentially meant that we're unable to harvest the best of our resources in order to get the best results out of our economy. Let me say to you, colleagues, the world does not owe Zimbabwe a living. There is something that we inherited from Rhodesia. It was called Rhodesian exceptionalism. It is this Zimbabwean exceptionalism that suggests that everything stands or falls on what happens in Zimbabwe. For goodness sake, I work across the continent. There is Sudan, there's Burundi, there's Central African Republic, there's South Sudan. There are many other places where the world has bigger strategic interests. What do we owe ourselves? We owe ourselves to move from this mutually destructive political impasse to a reform of the state that is comprehensive, to a reform of governance that's comprehensive, a reform of the economy that's comprehensive. But we can't get to that if we are polarized even in civil society. We've formed ourselves into cliques and little tribes. We've formed ourselves into unviable entities to contest both our local domineering forces and the global forces that have interest in Zimbabwe. As we fight over petty matters, there are others from outside our borders who have designs on our state. Those designs are not always good designs. Our insecurity is not just that which we see from unemployed youth who've been militarized, or party youths who've been given drugs or alcohol, or soldiers who have gone rogue. Our insecurity for the next 10 to 20 years arises out of the fact that there are forces and factors on this continent that have realized that Africa is the last frontier where the natural resources remain unexploited fully, where the land remains unexploited fully. And as we fight, somebody is going to exploit. When we're done fighting, there will be nothing left for ourselves. The poor cannot eat indignation and anger. The business of the national crisis is the lack of alternatives. I was told, and I mean no offense to anybody who's white, that the government, in trying to mend its battered international image, has started parceling out land to the whites and the European colleagues and others have begun to support this. But I've not heard anyone talking about the 500,000 farm workers. Is it because black lives, African lives, workers' lives don't matter? If the issue is to do justice for something that happened in that period during the fast-track land reform program, more black workers died. Nobody's talking about compensating their families. They lost. For a black worker with a little hut, mud hut, to be burnt and destroyed is a loss. He had no passport, he had no money to go elsewhere. Our colleagues, the farmers, were able to go to Zambia and farm. Those workers are milling around as vendors, being arrested every day, being harassed every day. The ones who tried cross-border trading are being harassed by xenophobia in South Africa. The ones who tried... The existence of our people must be primary to anybody wanting to assist our country. Must keep in mind, if the majority remain a minority in terms of the lens of recovery, this country will be back in crisis much bigger than we see now. So the issue is not whether or not to do compensation. The issue is, what are we compensating? I asked the minister a question. I said, farmers were heavily borrowed from banks. When you took the farms, the loans that they had were cancelled off, right? Who incurred that debt? So let me end by saying the following. The first crisis we face is a crisis of citizenship. We have to decide that we are Zimbabwean citizens. In deciding that we are Zimbabwean citizens, we have to look at all the things we've been deprived and ask, why are we deprived of them? Electricity, water, quality education, quality health, quality roads, quality. And then we have to ask, who has deprived us of these things and why? The second crisis is a crisis of leadership perception. It seems to me, colleagues, that we move from leadership by a gerontocratic class. That is those guys who are very old. Oh, no, I'm just being corrected here by the president that you don't believe in discriminating on the basis of age. There's a Ugandan comedian who said yesterday, the last president was 95, the new one is 89. I think he was wrong. He says basically Zimbabwe has been run by its ancestors. I don't subscribe to those views. Any of you whose parents are above 70, you will know the nature of the national crisis. They are very good and wise and significantly slow and established. They are set in their ways like concrete, unable to change. And if they say change, it is on their terms. So that crisis of leadership is not just the age of leadership, it's the age of the ideas of leadership. We are not investing enough in technology, in blockchain technology. We are not investing to take our economy into the future. We are still dealing with the basic business of getting Panadol and aspirin in our hospitals. I think we need a leadership whose ideas and ideology is younger and more forward-looking. From the crisis of citizenship and leadership, we have the crisis of institutions, Advocate Meyer. I am glad that the institution I'm addressing today is addressing the institutional challenge. Over the last 20 to 38 years of crisis, we've cannibalized every institution. And as a result, bar personalities, it is hollow. There's nothing that holds anything together. A ministry is held together by one good permanent secretary, maybe and half a director, right? A civil society group is held together by one founder leader and maybe a quarter so and so. Until we rebuild institutions, the vehicle for doing economic reform does not exist. Because brilliance that is not institutionalized and coordinated can easily be dispersed and divided. The business of an alternative is alternative ideas, but alternative institutional forms. The crisis of previous institutions, it took too long for expertise to rise up the ladder. The imagination required in this moment is how do we get younger people into the civil service? How do we get their expertise into the civil service so that we move from analog to the digital age and try and catch up with leapfrog and get into the fourth industrial revolution. So for those donors who are only supporting entrepreneurship, I'd say also support entrepreneurialism, which means make public servants entrepreneurial. Make sure young people are willing to serve. Not everyone wants to be a businessman and make money like some of my colleagues here, but there are people who have a commitment to serve. Until we create a public service that's depoliticized, based on merit, where the human resource planning and policy architecture enables people to rise up the ladder on the basis of what they can deliver and not the longevity they have stayed in a party, then we're not yet ready to reform. Finally, it is a crisis of social cohesion. My friends, being Karanga on Ndebele is not a paid job. That's why it has not won you tokens for electricity. Being Zezuru or Kore Kore is not an employment pack. It is an identity of which you must be proud. But in constructing a country that must compete with the United States of America, with China and Japan, if we do it solely on the basis of Mtupo Edu, you'll get to a place where there's no mofu. I mean, I've been to Wall Street, I've been to many other corridors where even with my big Mtupo, they ask me a simple question, so what is your expertise? I said, no, I went to the University of so and so and the University of such and such. Degrees are not experience and expertise. Degrees don't run countries. We must be here to get our people educated, but to give them experience and expertise, and to give them exposure to reconstruct our education and our health system. Not only do we require patriotism, we require expertise, we require experience. I hope in the many words I've been able to say, the first crisis our country faces is yourself. Until you can imagine that poverty is not a gift from God, and that although there is a belief that God has assigned of us, all of us, our portion. Those of us with pot bellies, we are blessed. Those of you with a lean structure, drought, and those of you with bald heads, you are in a place of recession. Our national stagnation was made by people, it can be unmade by people. We cannot continue to arrest, to cajole, and charge with treason young people who out of frustration say statements. Whether those statements are unfortunate or not, it's immaterial. They are terrorists who are ensuring this country has no fuel. Yeah. Terrorists who are stealing forests. Terrorists who are killing. Until we spend expensive resources arresting terrorists and not just going to the trade fair and making empty threats on how to deal with the big fish. Prison has become the place where big criminals keep the small criminals. Until the big criminals start going to prison, we're not doing anything. So, you are the first crisis. Keep your eyes on the ball is long term. Even if tika visa each, chichawea chimwe, if we don't remove this, the structure of the economy, the structure of oppression and governance, if it doesn't change, if there's no comprehensive state reforms, no matter how beautiful, how young, no matter how dashing, how diverse, the new leader becomes, we remain mired in crisis. Because it is a structural crisis, it requires structural solutions. hazvireve kuti timbosiya aiwa zvese vaiti kudhara vatsvangira vaiti kubvisa kwacho musatya hapana tiri zvinezvi atataura kuti then you are the first crisis. The second crisis is our ideas. This space must be about alternatives. Those alternatives can't come from these wise men and women alone. If you stop thinking and you sublet the thinking function to a few men and women in leadership, you have created the problem we created in 1980. Advocate Mahere, when Mugabe came, akapfeka safari suit, we started singing, Mauya, comrade. Mauya, tonga, and akati tonga, until amen. We agreed, Nana Advocate Chamisa Dara, Nana Biti, that the constitution we make must be distrustful of Chamisa, of Biti, of Kagoro. The framework of leadership must not put any faith in men, because the two of them, the Bible says, cursed is he who put their trust in the arm of a man. Our trust should be in our collective ability to reach the destination of the nation we have hoped for and we have imagined. Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much. Thank you very much for setting the context of our crisis and describing the threats that Zimbabwe faces so beautifully. I think the key thing that I derived from his presentation is the fact that the crisis that Zimbabwe faced in 1980 is the same crisis that Zimbabwe faces today. And just to put that into context, in 1980, my parents hadn't even met. 40 years down the line, the country is still in the same crisis. And that requires us to start imagining a different Zimbabwe. Start an ideas festival, a game of really reimagining how beautiful Zimbabwe can be and how we can solve the crisis. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Brian very much. And that description of the crisis was not to make us, feel pity for ourselves, but really to inspire within us a thirst for change. Zimbabwe cannot be in the same place it was in 1980. We really need to move the country forward, and urgently. Our next speaker is Senator Consilia Chinanjavana, who's going to talk to us about women and the struggle for democratization in Zimbabwe. Now, I was just speaking to the senator before her presentation and talking about the fact that every rights issue is a women's issue. We don't silo women into a corner and say, go and have a discussion, and I think she used my womb and say, and I'm not taura uku. Every rights issue, if you're talking about the economy, it's a women's rights issue. If you're talking about justice and constitutionalism, it's a women's rights issue. So with that, let's give Senator Consilia Chinanjavana a big round of applause as she talks to us about the women's struggle for democracy.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Soroi, President of the Democratic Zimbabwe. And Mr. President said that cannot be done without moving forward with the women folk of Zimbabwe, for they constitute 53% of the population of this nation. The role of women in democratization has been an uphill task, Mr. President, especially for the women folk, for they receive the brunt of all the negativity of a nation going askew. As it has been characterized by manipulation, opposed to genuine attempt to promote gender equality and equity, there is a glass